Greetings, everyone. It's good to see you all here today. I'm the Reverend Dr. Jill Olds, the director of the Yale Youth Ministry Institute here at Yale Divinity School. The YMI is very pleased to welcome all of you to today's gathering entitled Addressing Childhood Trauma with Liberation Psychology and Theology with Dr. Thema Bryant. If this is your first event with us, welcome. If we are well known to you, welcome. We're delighted that you have joined us. For our time today, Dr. Bryant will speak to us, and then we will have a brief Q&A session at the end of their presentation. We ask that you please remain muted throughout our time together, except when asking questions towards the end. We'll also be monitoring the chat window, so if you have a question, feel free to put it in there at any time as well. Our office has a fantastic staff, and I'd like to introduce them to you very quickly to thank them. We fall under the purview of the Center for Continuing Education at YDS. So we're blessed today to have Kelly Morrissey, the managing director of the center, and Megan Lukens, our communications coordinator. Thank you both for all that you do, and more importantly, for who you are. If you are new to the Yale Youth Ministry Institute, we invite you to peruse our website when you get a second. That is yaleyouthministryinstitute.org. We have a whole array of resources on there. Curricula for your youth, training modules for youth leaders, discussion forums, thousands of video clips and lectures given over the years by youth ministry experts, resources for anti-racism work, resources for youth working through mental health struggles. We have missional and outreach endeavors, links to other articles and materials. There's a lot on there, and that's all available for free. So please do feel free to check that out. This is our first gathering for this year's Lunch Lab series at the YMI, and it's the start of our second year of gatherings made jointly possible by the United Church of Christ and the YMI. We invite you to add Wednesday, October 1st to your calendar. On that date, we will welcome Dr. Amy Adamczyk to speak to us about supporting caregivers as they pass down faith to their children. So if you ever wonder about how do we help the parents take this outside of our Sunday classes or gatherings? That's a good time for you all to join us. You can find that registration link in the chat. All of our webinar efforts for this coming year, as I shared, are jointly sponsored by the YMI and the National Setting of the United Church of Christ denomination. We're so grateful to have them as partners in this work. The UCC's Love of Children program was recently awarded a $1.25 million grant through the Nurturing Children Through Worship and Prayer initiative by the Lilly Endowment. Through this program, the UCC has committed to an intentional 4-year-long period to research the state of children's ministry, to equip ministry leaders to make meaningful changes, to include children in the life of the whole church, create resources, strengthen relationships among clergy and volunteer leaders, all of this for the benefit of our youngest members and friends. So today we have the Reverend Tracy Potter and the Reverend Tyler Ung with us on today's webinar, representing that program. Welcome to you both. One such way that program is living out its purpose is through this partnership, where we'll create educational webinars throughout the years around some of the most pressing areas of children's ministry. So again, please keep an eye on those dates that are coming up from us. Some of those topics include things like childhood development, storytelling with youth, tending to parents, children in worship, trauma-informed ministry, fostering justice work and prophetic action among children. So if you would like to learn more about that initiative, please visit the website. We'll post that in the chat as well. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce all of you to Dr. Bryant. Dr. Thema Bryant is a psychologist, an author, a professor, a sacred artist, and a minister who is leading the way in creating healthy relationships, healing traumas, and overcoming stress and oppression. Dr. Bryant is the author of a recently released book entitled Matters of the Heart, which aims to empower readers to connect with themselves and others, delving into topics like control issues, emotional unavailability, practical activation activities, case studies, and teaching how to shift mindset and patterns around romance. Dr. Bryant completed her doctorate in clinical psychology at Duke University and her postdoctoral training at Harvard Medical Center's Victim of Violence program. Upon graduating, she became the coordinator of the Princeton University SHARE program, which provides intervention and prevention programming to combat sexual assault, sexual harassment, and harassment based on sexual orientation. She's currently a tenured professor of psychology at the Graduate School of Education and Psychology at Pepperdine University, where she directs the Culture and Trauma Research Laboratory. Dr. Thema is an ordained elder in the African Methodist Episcopal Church and leads the mental health ministry at First AME Church in Los Angeles. Most recently, she was the 2023 president of the American Psychological Association, and she is the host of the Homecoming podcast. Dr. Bryant, a warm welcome from all of us. We are very honored to have you here and to have the opportunity to learn from you today. And I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you so much. I am so grateful and excited to be with you all and grateful for your interest in the topic and us spending time intentionally focused on children, not only children, but child trauma survivors. And so I invite you to shift into this space. There is much that we carry, and the boxes don't tell the fullness of our stories. But I am glad that you are present, mind, body, heart, spirit, for us to think about our role in healing and restoration and in liberation. So I will share my screen. So, we are here to talk about addressing childhood trauma with liberation psychology and liberation theology. As a trauma psychologist, and I also like to name as a trauma survivor, people often, when they hear that this is the area of my focus, think, oh, that must be so depressing. But I have to tell you, while there can be despair and outrage for what has been done to children and adults, it is also hope inspiring work to come alongside people on their healing journey. To recognize, as we would say in my tradition, that often we don't look like what we've come through. And so I am aware that not only are you present as potential helpers or those who are already doing the helping work, the healing work, the liberating work, but we have another thing in common, which is we are all former children. So all of us are former children, and that's me in Baltimore in the 1970s with my dad, who is a retired minister, my mom, who transitioned to light last year as a result of breast cancer, and my brother, who's a pastor in Atlanta, Georgia. So we are a family of ministers, and whether or not you come from a religious, spiritual, faith background, or if faith found you later in life, or if you don't identify as a person of faith, I want to say all of you, every aspect of you is welcome here. If we are to talk about being living sanctuaries, what it means to be refuge, to be temple, to be safe space, then it is about people not having to hide aspects of themselves in order to be present. I also named that we are all former children as an important marker for us to consider when we talk about childhood trauma. We're not just talking about it in the abstract. We are not just talking about it in terms of theory, but I am very much aware that there are survivors among us, including myself. And so, if you, during your childhood experiences, were either a direct target of trauma, if you witnessed trauma or experienced the realities of vicarious trauma, I say that you are welcome here. I am grateful for your survival and hopeful, even more than surviving, that each of us would be able to thrive, to grow, and to flourish. And so, if we can be mindful of what we need during the talk, I will say from the outset, I won't give any graphic stories of trauma. We are all well aware of what those experiences can look like in terms of the details of it. What's important for us to walk through is the impact of the trauma and the ways in which we can heal and be restored. And from a liberation standpoint, not only individual healing, but also as a collective, how we can walk towards our healing. So I want to name that I am presenting to you from land that has been cultivated by the Tongva people and other indigenous peoples. I'm in Los Angeles, and I hope you know or will research those who cultivated the land on which you live and work and minister and heal. We're often familiar with land recognition, but not always labor recognition. And so this nation developed at a relatively rapid rate. And how did it do that? Largely based on exploited labor. Historically, we think about the labor of people of African descent. In modern times, we think about the labor of immigrants, those who are impoverished, those who are often more vulnerable to unfair and unjust systems. And so, as I remind our students at Pepperdine here in Los Angeles, while all of us are brilliant, I'm sure we are, we are not simply on this Zoom because we were the most brilliant, but because we had opportunity, and that there are many people who, given the same opportunity, could be in this space. So we say that not to get stuck in guilt, but have a sense of responsibility of what will I do with the opportunity I have, and what are the ways in which I will open the door and hold the door open for others. That I will not just be a quote unquote voice for the voiceless, but that I will pass the mic. And so for us to think about the voices of children, the voices of survivors. So, as we set the atmosphere, I want to name from the outset, and this is probably both my work as a psychologist and as a minister, that I believe in the possibility of restoration, of healing, of transformation. And so we come into this space to not only think about the horrors and the traumas, but to also think about the possibilities. And so, with that, I will invite us to take collective breath. Everything that I offer as a trauma informed facilitator is invitational. And so, I really am an advocate for body sovereignty. Body sovereignty. And this is especially important when we think about trauma survivors, that it is not for us to dictate what people do with their bodies, but to offer opportunities for people to choose. And so, everything that I offer, I invite you to take what I call sacred pause to consider, is this something that I want to do? And if you don't want to do it, by all means, don't do it. That'll be a part of your liberation. And for those who would like to try it, the invitation is yours. And so, as we think about compassion holds and embodiment, and oftentimes, not only does trauma often disconnect people from their bodies, but there are some theologies that are big on body shame that disconnect people from their bodies. So, as an act of radical revolutionary healing, we reclaim the sacredness of these bodies and being present with our bodies. So I invite you, for those for whom it is comfortable, one hand on the heart, one hand on your belly, inhaling in through your nose and exhaling out through your mouth. One hand on the heart, one hand on your forehead, inhaling in through your nose, exhaling out through your mouth. One hand on your forehead, one hand on the back of the head, communicating to yourself, I have you. I will not abandon myself nor erase myself. Inhaling in through the nose, exhaling out through the mouth. And the last compassion hold is to hug yourself. For some of you, it's the first hug of the day, might be the first hug of the week, maybe the first hug for a while. But we hold ourselves, love on ourselves, give ourselves compassion, inhaling in through the nose, exhaling out through the mouth. And I invite you to shake it out. And I would just like to say, if your camera is on or off, you look better. When we are not holding our breaths, we get more grounded and centered in ourselves. So we not only pay attention to our breath, but in Indigenous communities, assessment would often include such questions as, when was the last time you sang? When was the last time you danced? When was the last time you told story? And so I invite you to reflect on not just have you gotten the report done or the assignment done or your to-do list done, but where is the art and spirit of your survival? And when did you last feel connected to that? We also consider imagery. If you were to imagine children whole and liberated, what does that look like? And for yourself, whatever your role is, minister, therapist, advocate, uh, parent, when you consider yourself liberated, what does your own liberation look like? Can you get a picture of that? And how is that similar or different to the ways in which you have shown up today? A part of our healing and restoration is biological, and so we consider the vagus nerve, which is often associated with trauma and with the trauma recovery process. If you were like me, you grew up with grandparents who would say things like, settle yourself or go sit down somewhere. And so we consider, how do we settle ourselves and how do we help children to settle into their own bodies, not only with breath, but interestingly, humming is a way of soothing the nervous system, and rocking. So for those who come from faith traditions, I want you to just imagine the elders of that faith community humming and rocking. They had never done perhaps $1 million study to find that that was helpful for the vagus nerve, but we know that those things help to shift us when we are feeling overwhelmed or stressed. And so whether with children or even us as adults and former children, to give ourselves permission to breathe, to hum, to rock. And so as we consider trauma recovery from the standpoint of liberation psychology, we know that we want to not only pay attention to individual thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, but we want to pay attention to collective identities. So, how do children's various identities increase their risk for victimization? How do their various identities affect the way they are responded to by ministers, by medical personnel, by judges, by lawyers, by nurses? Uh, which children are believed and which children are not believed? And so we recognize it is not just a matter of the inner world of the child, but the changes that we need to make in the outer world so that people can be so that people can be safe, and so that healing and restoration will really be a priority versus those who are devalued and overlooked. We also understand from the standpoint of liberation that we don't just want to focus on symptom cessation, meaning decrease of distress, but we also want to consider growth and possibility of what does it mean for a child to not just survive the horrors of trauma, but what does it mean for them to flourish? What does thriving look like? And who do we believe has a right to have access and support so they can, in fact, thrive. So my daughter is a junior at New York University and is currently doing a study abroad program in Ghana. And in Ghana, the predominant language, along with English, the predominant cultural language is Twi. And the Twi phrase for how are you is actually translated to how's the body. And so I invite you to consider for yourself on today, how's the body? Where do you hold stress? Many of us hold it in our neck and shoulders. Some of us perpetually hold it in a wrinkled forehead or a tight jaw, grinding our teeth. Some of us hold it in the pit of our stomach or in our backs. And so there is a lot of backache in our nation and globally. So we want to ask the question, what are people holding? And the aches and pains that are in your body, unfortunately, did not just show up in adulthood, that many children are holding stress in their bodies. And so, as we consider ourselves, I invite you to take a moment to think about as you look at the blobs on the tree, and there's no judgment, no right or wrong on here. But on today, in this moment, which one reflects more of where you are today at this moment? Not the idealized version or the presented version, but kind of the truth of where you are. And I'm going to ask if you'll go into the chat and just share your number. We won't ask you why or what that means, but just as a way of truth telling, which is a part of our liberation work. Am I free enough to tell myself the truth? And am I free enough to tell others what I am feeling and where I am? In order for there to be healing and restoration, we have to first acknowledge the wounds so we will not be in denial of the wounds. And as you write yours in the chat, you can also look to see if there are others who may have a similar number to yours, or even be mindful of people who have shown up and are having a very different experience, just because, as we would say, life be lifing. So a lot of life is going on for people, both good news and very challenging news. And so when I say all of you are welcome, every part of you is welcome. I don't just mean the parts that make it easy for us to bear witness, but also for those who are in a painful season. I want to also appreciate your presence and acknowledge that just because we are present doesn't mean we're in a season of ease. And so I am grateful for you being here. And so, as we think about trauma and child trauma in particular, child trauma overwhelms the usual capacity to cope. So, all of us have ordinary stress or daily stress. Those stressors are usually associated with the various roles that you play in society. So, the stress of being a student, the stress of being a child, the stress of living in a particular community, the stress of your profession, financial stress. So, we have those stressors, and we wouldn't necessarily call those traumatic stressors. It's just role strain, the strain and stress that's a part of life. But then some of us, unfortunately, many of us, have experiences that exceed our usual capacity to cope. Not only are those overwhelming experiences, they can shift our sense of ourselves. They can overwhelm us emotionally. They can create feelings of helplessness, hopelessness, and despair. They can cause us to fear our own survival. And so we want to be mindful of those types of experiences and the ways in which they have shifted us. So some people have experienced physical abuse. And so we can think about child abuse, youth who are in dating relationships who have experienced partner abuse. And that has another layer when you're dating in secret, you're not allowed to date and you've started dating unbeknownst to your family, and then you end up in an abusive relationship. right? That becomes another layer of silence because now how can I tell? We also have the realities of community violence and school shootings. Unfortunately, quite rare in the US to the point where some parents in other countries don't want to send their children here as a result of the high rates of school violence and community violence. We also have children who have survived sexual abuse, molestation, and I should say around molestation and sexual assault. It is most likely to be perpetrated by someone known to the child. We often talk about stranger danger and warn our children about not going with strangers, and that's important. But we also want to be evidence informed, and the evidence shows that who is most likely to sexually violate children, family, friends, teachers, those who have access to the child. We also have the realities of sexual assault, sex trafficking, child sex exploitation. And many, as we think about the intersection of faith communities, many faith communities never apply their sacred texts to these kinds of experiences, never talk about them. We often keep trauma in the metaphor. So we'll talk about Noah and the ark, which is a trauma, but don't connect it to what would that look like in modern times for children who experience trauma. We also have psychological, emotional, and verbal abuse. We have children who have experienced abandonment, the trauma of having a parent incarcerated, and also as a juvenile being incarcerated. We have the realities of vicarious trauma, the realities of war, and we want to consider for immigrants and refugees, those who have been affected by war as well. Medical trauma. I mentioned my mom and breast cancer. Many of us have loved ones who have been affected by medical trauma, if not you yourself. And again, unfortunately, medical trauma does not wait till adulthood to show up. There are children who experience these realities as well, either directly or by their loved ones experiencing illness or sudden death. Traumatic grief and loss, death by suicide or homicide, are other forms of trauma. And then a form of trauma that has often been overlooked in the literature and definitely overlooked in many faith communities and by many mental health professionals is the trauma of oppression, that racism, sexism, classism, ableism, heterosexism, all of these can lead to traumatic events, increased risk for hate crimes, increased risk for violation and disenfranchisement. And so we want to consider, and I invite you to pause and reflect, who are the trauma survivors that you immediately have compassion for? There have been a lot of talk in the news about sexual trauma, especially with the Epstein files and people coming forward saying that they are survivors, so they may relate in a particular way. But then we also want to consider who are the victims that you have less compassion for, sometimes boys as opposed to girls, older adults, older children versus younger children, children of a particular socioeconomic status or race or ethnicity. And so we want to check ourselves so that our compassion is not discriminatory, but for us to have compassion for all child trauma survivors. And then we'll consider that the effects of trauma follow people across their lives for many. While recovery is possible, there are also adults who live with the realities of ongoing consequences of the experiences they had as children. So we'll talk some about the effects, about treatment, about culture, and also about liberation. So the effects of trauma are holistic. They can show up emotionally, They can show up somatically. So, somatic complaint or a somatic symptom is a symptom of distress in the body that does not have a medical explanation. So, sometimes when someone is stressed, they may develop nausea or a migraine or backache that is directly related to the stress that the body has been feeling. People may also have physical consequences, social consequences, difficulty trusting. And I like to say it may not be that you, quote unquote, have trust issues, but that you have not encountered a lot of people or systems that were trustworthy. So that's an important liberation framework. Instead of simply problematizing the individual, for us to consider, have they actually encountered safe spaces that were trustworthy? Or is their vigilance or even hypervigilance a response to their realities? So affects us socially, affects us cognitively, and affects us spiritually. So, cognitively, we want to consider for children the effect on schoolwork, on the ability to focus or to concentrate. But we'll start thinking about preschool children and regressive behaviors. And so we want to pay attention to these signs because sometimes children are indicating trauma before they have spoken the word of what has happened to them. So, aggressive behavior, you may have a child who is potty trained and had not been wetting the bed, and suddenly we start to see those behaviors again. You may have a child who had stopped sucking their thumb, and now they start doing those behaviors that were associated with their earlier years. They may have gotten comfortable sleeping by themselves, and suddenly they're not able to soothe themselves or to feel comforted or safe to sleep. So we want to consider regressive behaviors, separation fears, and often we think about children going to school and we think it must be they're worried about themselves, which some children are. But you also have children who are growing up in homes where there is partner abuse and they are afraid for their parent. Of is my parent going to be okay when I am away from them? Or and this has happened to some children, is my parent going to escape or leave while I'm at school or at daycare? And so then will I see them again? Uh, Changes in eating and sleeping, physical aches and pains, crying and irritability. Some children you will see have lost the capacity to play. So they're on the playground, or if the church has a nursery, there are all these toys there, but they are kind of frozen within their bodies, disengaged. Or ritualistic play. Sometimes they are recreating what they have experienced or what they saw. So taking dolls or puppets and having them fight, or dolls and puppets and acting out sexual violation. So we want to be tuned into the reenactment. And of course, we will know that when we see children playing in a particular way, that doesn't mean for sure this is what happened, but it may be what they were exposed to. So, what I mean by that is we've had instances where children are acting out something sexual with dolls, and it may be what happened to them, but it may be what they saw on television. It may be that they saw their parents or an older sibling engaged in sexual behavior. And so when we are seeing indicators, it is to raise our concern and curiosity so that there can be more attention paid so that our children can be safe. Often children can have magical thinking related to that trauma, and the magical thinking may be if only I'm a good girl or a good boy, then this thing won't happen anymore. Or if I close my eyes really tight, then I could disappear. So they may feel responsible for what has happened to them, a sense of shame, blame, and uh, responsibility, which is not theirs to carry. School age children may have some of these same symptoms, but as well as concentration problems. I was working with a survivor whose uh, her mother was dating someone who had begun molesting her during the night. And what she discovered was if, because she would sleep with her door closed, uh, if he opened the door and she was laying there awake, then he would close the door and leave. But if she had fallen asleep by the time he opened the door, then she would be awakened to him already in the bed, harming her. And so, as just a child, a school age child, she developed a strategy of resilience of not sleeping. And so, in order to not fall asleep, she would stand with her back against the wall. And so, when he would open the door, he would see her standing there and then he would back out of the room. Now, what did that mean? It meant that she was up all night, and so she would go to school and sleep at school, and so got labeled as lazy, got labeled as resistant, got labeled as disinterested, got labeled as incapable. And so sometimes people's children's symptoms of distress are focused on as that is the problem, as opposed to what we are seeing being an indicator of an actual problem. And what we're seeing is a symptom. So they may have difficulty concentrating, and they may engage in behaviors in order to get attended to. Perpetrators, offenders, will often target children who are not being attended to, who are kind of off to themselves or on their own. And so, as a way of trying to get the attention, even if it's negative attention, children will sometimes engage in particular behaviors. Or you may have a child who is very outgoing and extroverted who becomes very withdrawn. Adolescents can also experience symptoms of distress that are often similar to the symptoms that we would see in adulthood. We can see shame and guilt, increased risk taking. Some of that risk taking you can think of as passive suicidality, where I may not actively engage in behaviors that would result in my death, but I engage in behaviors in such a way where I really wouldn't mind not being here. That maybe it would be a relief to me if I could somehow check out. So they may also withdraw. In terms of the pseudo maturity, we have the term called the parentified child. So that's the super responsible child that teachers and faith leaders often praise, right? They often love, like, oh my goodness, you're wise beyond your years. But sometimes that wisdom has been born out of a necessary independence of looking out for themselves because no one else is showing up for them. They may be medicating the trauma with substance use. We may also see connections to eating, self-soothing around eating quote unquote comfort foods, or development of eating disorders where the one thing I can control is what food goes into my body. They may engage in behaviors, delinquent behaviors, a change in school performance where before they were doing well and we see a fall in their grades, self destructive or self harming behaviors, such as cutting or burning. And so, again, it's important to not think about how do I make them stop the behavior, getting high or drinking, but for us to consider if this is a self soothing behavior or a way of medicating the pain, what is the pain, right? What is the issue that we want to help address so that they are safe? And also so that they're not having to navigate those spaces by themselves. And then, even as we think about child trauma survivors, we want to consider adult survivors. And those of you who work in the academy, in organizations, in clinics, in ministries, to know that some of the behaviors that you're seeing in your colleagues and coworkers is the result of untreated trauma. And some of your behaviors and tendencies may also be as a result of your untreated trauma. Some of us have jumped into helping others when our own wounds have not been healed. So then we find ourselves overextending and erasing and neglecting ourselves. So we want to consider post-traumatic stress, which shows up not only in adulthood, but we can see those symptoms in children as well. Anxiety, depression, numbness. I mentioned the substance use, aggression, fighting, sexual behaviors. You know, when children have been taught that this is the one thing people will like about you is your body, or this is your one way to have a pseudo sense of control. In terms of aggression, it's important again to consider what have people had to survive and where did they learn those behaviors. Difficulty focusing, and then also for some adults, difficulty making decisions because of a loss of trust of the self. When I don't trust myself, then I'm looking for everyone else to decide for me. I believe that other people know more than I do. We may also have difficulty completing work, focusing, concentrating. Various consequences of the physical body can result as a result of trauma. So I mentioned the somatic ones, but there are also the physical consequences, whether pregnancy, STDs, broken bones, various injuries that happened as a result of the trauma. Now, a part of liberation, or I'm going to say decolonizing psychology, is to incorporate spirituality. The foreparents or founders of psychology often were people of faith who that was a part of their framework. But then there was a shift with psychology really wanting to be considered a science. And so, if we are a science, then anything we cannot prove or put under a microscope or control or manipulate, then we don't want to attend to that. We'll say, like, that's not our purview, that's out of our element. Meanwhile, the majority of people in the United States endorse some level of spirituality or religiosity. And when religion and spirituality are ignored, we want to think about who is especially disserved. Women and people of color endorse higher rates of religiosity. So when that is ignored or pathologized, it is disproportionately affecting women and racially and ethnically marginalized persons. So, how does trauma affect children and adults who experience these overwhelming experiences, the overwhelming events? Some experience a loss of faith, where they may say things like, I was told that God is love and God is all powerful and God is everywhere. But if I was violated, one of those things wasn't true. So now they're wrestling with, grappling with, what did my religion or spirituality tell me was true? And then how does that line up with my lived experience? And so trying to make sense of it means that some people have lost their faith. Some people lose their faith because the offender or perpetrator were members of their faith community, including their religious leader. Some people lost their faith because they were blamed and shamed in religious and spiritual spaces for their violation. I was working with a survivor who was molested, and she was saying she would pray every night for God to forgive her for not being a virgin anymore. So to think that you have been violated and believe that God is mad at you, that people are mad at you, that you're not special anymore. So there can be a loss of faith, but also for some people, an increase of faith. I did a study on African American sexual assault survivors, and the survivors who experienced greater symptoms of distress would rely on their faith practices more, right? Which we can think can make sense in some ways. That some of us, if we're in a difficult season pray more or attend more services or read the religious text more. So while some people will lose their faith or give up their faith, some people will intensify their faith to say, like, I have to fast more, I have to pray more, I have to find the right service that's going to help me to get free. And then some people have a change of faith where they say, like, this one didn't work for me, or this one didn't address my issues. And so now I have shifted to a different tradition that somehow feels more healing, more empowering, more aligned with my life. And then people can also have their relationships be affected. So, around trust, around what emotions are okay for you to share with others, and challenges with sexual intimacy. In terms of expressing our emotions, I like to say, both in my religious community and cultural community, as a child, I often heard the phrase fix your face, right? You all heard that before. Fix your face means, like, you as a child, it's okay for you to look pleasant or grateful or neutral. But as a child, you're not supposed to look upset or bored or mad. And some of us grew up in those environments, and now, even as adults, deny our own emotional experiences. So, what does that look like? People saying, like, I don't care, or it didn't bother me, whereas everything in their system is showing, in fact, they were bothered, understandably. So we consider what these effects are of child trauma. We also consider what happens when children experience new threats in the aftermath of trauma. What is their tendency? So then some children are quick to fight. If they feel slighted or disrespected or overlooked, then they can go from 1 to 10 very easily. And it may be this feeling of, if I am slighted in any way, that might end up in me being hurt. And if someone's going to be hurt, it's not going to be me. So then the child is in warrior mode, in fight mode. Some children are in flight, so they are quickly, if they sense anything that doesn't feel good to them, they're quick to depart. So, depart friendship circles, depart schools, and some adults become uh, uh, survivors of that same tendency, where they will quickly leave faith communities, move neighborhoods, running, looking for safety, and have difficulty having any capacity for conflict or for tension. Some children and adults respond with freeze. So I've worked with some survivors of sexual violence, that if they are in a situation, a future situation, where their bodily integrity feels threatened, they unconsciously freeze, waiting for it to be over. And so, and then of course, there can feel a lot of shame for that, or self blame. But it is the nervous system figuring out that there are times when we were not physically able to escape. And so we escape in our minds. We also have tend and befriend, which some call please and appease. So with this, trauma survivors figure out in a situation who has the power, and they try to get on that person's good side. So if it is, we'll say, partner abuse in the household, and let's say it doesn't have to be this way, but let's say it's the father abusing the mother, as opposed to associating with the mother, they may feel very connected to the father. And the idea is, if I'm on his side, I'm going to be safe. If I'm on her side, I'm going to get hurt. So let me disconnect from her and go with the person who's in charge. Now, some people then become adults who do that same thing. We can see that nationally and globally, where some people will side with the bully. Some people will side with whoever has the most power, the most status, the most money, and think, like, this is my way of saying, staying safe, right? This is my way of trying to protect myself. So there are various ways that we try to bring about healing and restoration. The first, of course, is safety, right? When we think about post-traumatic stress, it assumes the trauma is over. So it's a very different kind of counseling to provide support for someone who is still being violated, right? And we do that, but that is more about helping people survive, helping them cope, but they don't even have like the stability for us to think about actual healing and restoration. So we think about parent-child interaction therapy. That is usually done with the child and the non-offending parent to heal that relationship because the child has often lost trust in the parent who did not intervene or the parent who was not able to keep them safe. There's also trauma-focused CBT. There's integrative treatment of complex trauma. So complex trauma is long-term ongoing trauma versus acute trauma is a one-time incident, like a school shooting or a car accident. We also want to be mindful, and many of you will play a part in this, wraparound services. So wraparound services are important holistically because therapy is usually just like 1 hour a week. And children and families need a lot more than 1 hour a week. And they also need support addressing the various aspects of their lives. So wraparound services may be that children are getting help with housing. It may be that they're getting educational support in order to try to catch up. They may be receiving substance abuse treatment. They may be receiving treatment for physical and medical consequences of the trauma. They may be receiving exposure for adolescents around jobs training for them to consider, what are things that they will be able to do to provide for themselves. So, along with parent child interactive therapy, a common child intervention is trauma focused cognitive behavioral therapy. So, I want to give this example, which I call the walking in your healing case. I was working with a young woman who was a survivor of child abuse, various forms of child abuse. She was a Christian, and we had been working together for a couple of weeks. And she came to session one week and said, I told my pastor I was in therapy, and my pastor told me I need to stop letting those devil people mess with my mind. And, I was like, who, me? Right? Uh, and she said that the pastor told her, I already prayed for you. You need to walk in your healing. And so she came to session and told me that. And I said to her, if you feel comfortable, I invite you to share with your pastor that as he knows, healing can take different pathways. That some people are healed instantly, like the woman who touched the hem of Jesus's garment. And then some people are like the man in the Old Testament who had to wrestle with the angel all night. And so what we're doing here is the wrestling. And so she came back the next week and said, I told my pastor what he said, and he said I could stay. And what's your name? I share that story at Pepperdine, where I'm training future therapists, because sometimes therapists will get in a tug of war with faith leaders and present it as he presented it, like it's an either or, like to say you're going to pray or you're going to go to therapy. And that's a false choice. So we want to equip people to combat trauma holistically. So there will be spiritual practices and there'll be psychological practices. So psychologically, the acronym to remember trauma-focused CBT is practice. So the P is for psychoeducation and parenting. So teaching the children and their parents to be able to connect the dots between the ways the child is behaving and what they experienced. Because sometimes children are getting in trouble for their symptoms of distress. So we want to help them to understand their own process and help their parents to understand it. It doesn't mean that we're saying, oh, it's okay for kids to keep misbehaving, but we want to respond to it in the context of what it is. We also teach children relaxation skills. So we started with that breath work, so learning how to breathe, to relax the muscles in your body. Our bodies are designed to rally when we're in danger, but they are not designed to live in a constant state of vigilance. And so, allowing parents and children to learn how to take breath, we mentioned before, humming and rocking. We also teach skills about affect regulation, that it is human to have all different emotions, but what do we want to do with it? So, for example, constructive anger or destructive anger. So it is understandable for us to be angry about what has happened to you or happened to your child. And what do we want to do with our outrage? Our outrage may be our motivation for working for the child's safety and restoration. Our outrage sometimes drives people to get involved in community watch programs or to become a rape crisis counselor or to start a ministry. And so to be able to feel my feelings, but also to be able to regulate and express what I feel. We also teach cognitive coping, helping people to see the connection between their thoughts, their feelings, and their behavior. And then the T is for the trauma narrative, helping the child, or we also do this intervention with adults, to be able share our stories, to tell our stories. Often with adults, with children, we'll often use the arts to help them tell it. So they may color pictures, they may do a puppet show, they might write a poem or a rap song, they might choreograph a dance that tells the story of what they have experienced, but that also doesn't end at the point of the trauma, but that the artwork and the narrative continues to paint a picture of life after the trauma. There may be things that they are avoiding as a result of the traumatic event. And so for them to have exposure to that. So if it was a school shooting, understandably, sometimes it's scary for children to go back to school. And so we can give them exposure in increments. So first, we might just look at pictures of the school. We might drive them to the school, but they don't stay just to experience going. They may go in and just stay for first period or for half a day. And so gradual exposure can help people to face those fears. And then we have sessions with the children and the caregiver and or parents together. And in that, the child shares their trauma narrative, their artwork, or however they wrote their story. And you do preparation work first with the parents because you don't want the parent to respond negatively to the child sharing. So you provide support for them of what are supportive things to say so you don't shut the child down. Because sometimes parents will say things like, we don't talk about that. You shouldn't say things like that. And so creating space for the child to be heard, not only by the professional or by the minister, but by their own parent. And then we think of ongoing safety skills. Now, this is important for us to tease apart that in no way should there be blaming or shaming of the child. And at the same time, we want to teach some survival strategies or survival skills to reduce the risk of violation. So if I'm working with an adolescent who ended up in an abusive relationship, nothing about abuse is that adolescent's fault. And I want to teach some skills around what may be some warning signs around dating. What are some attributes or traits you would want to look for? What are some things you discovered in that other relationship that perhaps you didn't know before? For small children, we can think about teaching good touch, bad touch, and that kind of recovery. We also want to consider the radical healing framework for children who experience the trauma of oppression. So we can think about this as a liberation model. So creating connection instead of isolation can be a part of our healing. Sharing our story instead of shame and silence can be a part of healing. Understanding our culture and celebrating our culture is a part of radical healing. Engaging in knowledge seeking. So there are some things we didn't know before, but as an individual, as a family, as a community, we want to grow in knowledge. And then being a change agent, even for children, children becoming activists or saying, like, I want to speak up about this issue, or I want to go to the Take Back the Night march for sexual assault survivors, or I want to donate some of my um, money that I got for my birthday to whatever this issue is to help other children. Or I want to do a fundraiser that will help children who've experienced what I've experienced. And then dreaming for the future, right? That's a part of liberation, is not just addressing the trauma and oppression, but engaging in possibility and thinking about what we can do and what we can be. So we talk some about parent-child interactive therapy. And so we also want to consider the arts for healing and expressive arts, poetry, dance, song, visual arts. All of those can be helpful in giving people voice, speaking about the unspeakable, dealing with the symptoms and the difficulties and the distress. And so we can consider one of those being embodiment. So, as a moment of body sovereignty, I'm going to invite you, if it aligns with you, to reach up to the sky, stretching 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And then I'll invite you to curl over. If it aligns with you, you can put your hands toward your feet or toward the floor and curve your back. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And now we're going to have an 8-second dance party. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And roll your shoulders back and back and back. When you think about trauma healing, it is not only to create space for people's tears, but also to create space for people's joy. We want to consider the culture of the child, and that can include their race, their ethnicity, sexual orientation, religion, gender, socioeconomic status, disability, age, migration status as well, as we think about the trauma that many children are experiencing with the ICE raids and deportation and separation from parents. So we don't want to ignore those realities. That is a part of the child's experience. Sometimes, out of our own discomfort, we want to avoid these topics and say, oh, but they're children. But if you talk to children, they will share with you their experiences of what they have felt directly, what they have witnessed, what they have heard. So we want to not ignore that. Aspects of trauma can create some barriers for healing if we say, like, we're not supposed to talk about it, or we're at increased risk for trauma. But we also want to know there's cultural wisdom and cultural resources. So some children are survivors of intergenerational trauma or historical trauma, that they come from a line of people who have been violated. But we want to say, in addition to inheriting wounds, you can also inherit wisdom. So we want to think about cultural strengths, cultural practices, cultural rituals, including religious rituals that may be a part of people's healing. So some people are more focused on their faith than others. Some people will engage in different forms of discipline, but we want to say across culture that we want to identify abuse as abuse. And a part of what I do is helping parents know other strategies. Sometimes parents parent in a particular way because that's how they were raised, and they really don't know anything else they can do when a child is misbehaving. And so learning other ways of healing and correction. So as we think about this from the standpoint of liberation theology, we want to consider, for those who are theistic, that God has the marginalized in mind, that God has trauma survivors in mind, that God has children in mind. So people being a part of religious or spiritual community may experience benefits of having social support. Their worldview may be a part of what helps them to heal, where survivors may say things like, even if I didn't get justice directly, I believe that ultimately there will be justice. So that may be a way that people frame things that gives them relief. Sometimes, if their parents or families are involved in a religious community, they may engage or choose to not engage in some destructive behaviors that could compromise their health. We have seen research studies on the benefits of prayer, not only when people pray for themselves, but when other people pray for them. Interestingly, there are studies that even show the benefits of being prayed for, even when you didn't know you were being prayed for. So that was a study done at Duke University Medical Center with people who were recovering from surgery. There's less research on encounters with the Holy Spirit or spiritual or supernatural experiences, but we want to have space for people to talk about their beliefs, their practices, and their spiritual encounters, not only adults, but children. To consider that we are all sacred and worthy of care, worthy of respect, worthy of being protected. We want to be mindful not to engage in spiritual bypassing or toxic spirituality. So, toxic spirituality is when people can only talk about good feelings and cannot talk about their emotional pain. So, if someone is grieving, a child is grieving, and people respond by saying, well, you should just be grateful, or you should just praise God for the time you had. So, that's a way of shutting down people's emotional lives and experiences. So, uh, we want to foster a spirituality where truth telling is welcome and where we can be human. So to be human is, yes, we are living souls, we are spiritual beings, we may have spiritual strength, but we also may have tenderness. And you can be a person of faith, a child of faith, and still experience depression, anxiety, panic attacks, addiction. So we want to be truth tellers, rooted in truth for the fullness of people's experience. When children and families are a part of a faith community, you also want to find out what does their faith community teach about love, teach about justice, teach about trauma, teach about healing or wellness. That are they a part of a faith tradition that is empowering them on their journey, or do they feel only silenced and shamed? There are different interventions that are involved. Mindfulness is one. Now, some people who are not Buddhists sometimes get nervous about mindfulness and say, oh, it's against my religion. And what I like to tell people is contemplative practice is a part of every tradition. It's sitting still and breathing. So there's nothing antichrist about breathing and focusing on your breath. So we want to create space for, and some churches have started doing this, having room for silent prayer, or some time for meditation, whether meditation on a song, on the breath, on a scripture, that it's important to be able to slow down instead of sometimes we are busy because we are unhealed. So is it well enough with my soul that I can be still? Some people will, in addition to therapy, may find it helpful to pray, to read sacred texts, to attend services, to go for pastoral counseling. And for those who are pastoral counselors, I just encourage us to operate within our scope of training. So, pastoral support is one thing. If you have a child who is experiencing suicidality or panic attacks or other mental health conditions, in addition to the pastoral counseling, it will be important to provide the referrals. So there are interventions that are specific to people's faith traditions as well. And fasting may be a part of what people engage in. We want to be tuned in to be sure that that's being approached in a healthy way instead of an unhealthy way. Many religious backgrounds, traditions talk about the power of testimony, telling our story of the ways in which we overcome and how that can be encouraging for people to know, for children to know they're not the only ones. And then, whatever the sacraments of your faith tradition are, connecting that to healing and restoration is important. For faith communities that incorporate movement, sacred dance, waving our hands, that can be a part of reclaiming the body. Being prayed for can be a part of people's restoration. Meditation, contemplative practice, getting out in nature. Some people need a break from people, especially if they're trauma survivors. They may say, I encounter God the most when I'm sitting in the park or when I go to the beach. Visualization, to see beyond my present moment, to imagine the life that I want for myself. Some people will have dreams that they find comforting. So, not just nightmares, but kind of affirming dreams. So, what are those kind of spiritual experiences? And of course, counseling. So, our larger role uh, in society as change agents, and this is a part of liberation, is advocates. So I want to advocate for children. I want to advocate for trauma survivors. I want to encourage resilience and resistance of oppression in all of its forms. And we don't want to just help people in the aftermath. We also want to work toward prevention. How do I work toward prevention? That may be offering parenting classes. That may be creating a safety network within schools or communities. That may be combating oppression in its various forms. So we think about healing and thriving and continuing to educate ourselves. And here's an important part: how do we model our own care? So I don't share all of this for it to be further evidence for you to erase yourself because the children are in need of rescue, but for you to also tend to your inner child, to tend to your own restoration so that it can be well with you. And so I invite your soul to tell your heart, mind, body, and spirit, welcome home. For you to be at home with your breath, at home with your body, at home with your spirit. I am happy to take your questions or to hear your comments.
Dr. Bryant, thank you so much for all of this. This is incredibly rich, and we could take this in so many different directions. You've given us a lot to ponder. So thank you very, very much. And folks, a reminder, if you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat. I have seen questions around whether we will get the slides
Sure.
and
Yes.
referencing different studies that you mentioned too. And we'll be in touch via email after the presentation about those things with anyone who attended today. So thank you for that. Dr. Bryant, to get us started, one of the features that really undergirded some of the things you mentioned is noting that trauma affects us at all different ages, right? It affects us as children, it affects us as teens and as adults, and it is something we carry with us in different ways at different times. And it's interesting to me as someone who often hears the buzzword phrase of intergenerational ministry, where all ages come together to learn about and experience the holy. I'm wondering if you could help me kind of put those pieces together and imagine with me what an intergenerational trauma-informed program might look like for a church.
Yeah.
You said that coaching a parent with a child present is more effective than just handing a parent a list of things to do, and it makes me wonder if there's some untapped potential here. Is there some
Yeah.
way we can think about that?
Great. Thank you so much. I love that with intergenerational ministry, how we can address trauma. So one of the examples I like to share with people around parenting and creating more truth telling in spaces is during the pandemic. I started a tradition with my kids that we continue to do, and that's just at dinner to say the best and worst part of your day, and to say one thing. This part we altered, but during that time, one thing you miss as a result of the pandemic. And I would answer as well. So this is important as uh, transparency is contagious. Our children watch us. And often, as parents and in religious settings, we hold things very tight. And so then it gives them the impression that if I am strong like my parent, I will never feel any distress. Right. So, in other words, for me to be able to say, I miss going to lunch with my girlfriends, create space for them to say they were missing their friends as well. For me to say, like, what was the best part of my day, it also helps if you or your child is in a place of despair. Gratitude is a protective factor. The problem is sometimes we only want people's gratitude. So, yes, what is something that happened today that I'm grateful for or that I'm happy about? But then also, like, what was the worst thing that happened today? And I will say to you, in transparency, sometimes for my kids, it will be several days in a row where the best thing was whatever we were eating, and the worst thing was nothing. Yeah, because like, what's happening? We're home during a pandemic, but for all of the times when it was just like the food or nothing, there would also be those days when there was actually something. And because we had that framework, then they already knew they could share it. And so, in our faith communities, I would say being able to, I would say, teach the full text. So, whatever people's faith tradition is, and I know that many who are present are from a Christian tradition, many of those narratives, including the narratives that we usually give children, have trauma in them, like Daniel in the lion's den, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Like these are all trauma. The cross is a trauma story. And so for us to make things more relevant, to talk about how that could connect or what they might be feeling, because there are parts of the story that are there, but we're getting the summary, so to ask in a family setting, what might people have been feeling on that arc. And not only, were they worried about their own survival, but all the people who were lost. So we can think now about all the collective loss that's taking place nationally and globally. And so, what might that feel like? And an important message that you can feel more than one thing at the same time. So you might feel hopeful, or because usually people are going to do the like, I trust God. Beautiful. I'm glad you trust God. What else do you feel? So creating space, I think, for those conversations and modeling that for children uh, can allow us to do more healing work.
Yeah, that makes total sense, and, I appreciate it too, you're talking about bringing in different aspects of our tradition, if we come from a religious tradition, what those pieces might be, right? The
Yes.
Christian scriptures are rife with stories of trauma. And you talked about cognitive, what was the phrase that you used? Was
Processing
cognitive
or cognitive
processing,
coping.
coping, right,
Yeah,
which brings in all of the different pieces of the
right.
thinking and the feeling and the behaviors that
Yeah.
tie
I
together.
can give one model. I call it a Christo psychology trauma response. And I can like do that in like 2 minutes. But um, eh, and let's say if we all agree that the cross was a trauma, we all agree that was traumatic. And so then we look at these kind of 7 components of healing of what happened after the cross, which interestingly, there's also research about each of these 7 components. So the first one is what I call tomb time, that Jesus didn't jump right up right after it happened. And many of us, after a medical procedure, we're like jumping back up. We're like, I don't need the time. I'm good. The death of a loved one, we're like rushing back to work. Miscarriage, running back to work. And so, can I give myself sacred pause? Can I allow myself to have been affected? Can I slow down and allow myself to be gathered? So we have tune time, and then social support. So who were the people that Jesus first appeared to? It was the women, and the women were the ones who didn't run and hide during the crucifixion. They were standing there at the cross. So my point about that is, think about who shows up for you when you're bloody, right? Some people don't have it emotionally or spiritually. Sometimes you're going through and some people just don't show up. It might be their own life, whatever that is. But there are people who will show up for you. Will you let them in? Because many times we're in like avoidance, and we're like, I'm good, I'm fine. But it is healing to reveal myself, to allow myself and my wounds to be revealed in the presence of people who show up for me. And then after social support, then we talk about self care that Jesus asked, like it's clearly just like a whole verse of, Do you all have something to eat? Asking the disciples. And they're like, We have some fish, and he ate the fish. So, what are we doing to take care of ourselves, including our physical selves? And then I unpack this notion of forgiveness, because sometimes in religious settings, especially in Christian settings, we have this forced forgiveness. But what I like to say is we have inaccurately combined forgiveness with reconciliation. So Jesus forgave, but after he rose, he didn't go visit the soldiers who stabbed him. Why? Because they would have tried to kill him again. So some of us haven't been able to heal because we keep trying to hold on to people who not only violated us, but who are not sorry. So repentance is a change of mind, a change of behavior, but to just tell survivors of molestation or child abuse that they just need to submit and go back to it, they're not going to be able to heal in that. So separating forgiveness from reconciliation when people are in a harmful circumstance, and then showing our wounds. So Jesus showed his wounds to Thomas and to the other disciples. Then there is ascension. Ascension is post-traumatic growth. So not only do we survive, but then we want to grow and go even higher. And then the very last one is, I'm coming back to help everybody else. And many of us skip all those other steps. We were on the cross one day, and the next day we want to start a ministry to help people, and we have not gone through our own process. And so, using whatever your sacred text is to look at, like, what does restoration look like, so it's not just one step.
That's really salient, and that makes so much sense. Thank you. That's I do think a lot of us tend to, especially those of us who are in ministry or in some form of service professions, think about how can we use this personal experience or this trauma to then better someone else, to minister to someone else, to tend to someone else. And that's a great impulse. But I also wonder if it isn't a trauma response akin to what you said about fix your face, right?
Uh-huh.
Like
Right.
we have to be all right. In fact, we have to
Yeah.
be more than all right. We have to be helping
Yes.
others now. And it's like, wait a
Right.
minute, that's a
Can you
quick
take
jump.
time?
Yeah. Yep, yep,
Absolutely. And
yep.
I saw a question in the chat for people who are not religious or spiritual to be able to provide support. And that's so important to ask uh, children and their family questions about their beliefs and traditions, especially in light of whatever they're coming in for. So, how central is your faith or religion to you? And if you're dealing with the whole family, it might be different for different family members. But so that you can have a sense of that, and do they want that incorporated in their treatment? So, an easy way, I think, to incorporate it for people who don't have all the exposure to it is what we call solutions focused therapy. With solutions focused therapy, you just ask people, when you were doing your best, what were you doing? And then let's reclaim some of those practices. So, some people, when they were feeling better, they were a part of a faith community, or they were praying each morning before they went to school. And so, if that's something that has worked for you, then we can reclaim that.
Yep. Um, a Another question in the chat, are you writing another book? And, can the outline of the 7 components of healing after the cross perhaps be an outline you could provide to us after the fact?
Yes. So the
Great.
the 7 components are on one of the slides I skipped. So when you get the slides, it's already there. And I am working on another book, and this one is on anxiety,
Mm,
but the different masks of anxiety, like perfectionism and control issues, that are often covers for our anxiety, and how we can heal those.
mm, thank you for that. In the 2 minutes we have, I'm curious if you could say a word or 2 about testimony. There was a question earlier in the chat about, do I approach, folks who have perhaps traumatized me in the past, or do I share my trauma with loved ones who may or may not believe me? And it occurs to me that testimony is sharing one's story is embedded in so many traditions, Christian and otherwise, and there are different ways, different timings, different approaches, different inclinations there. Could you say a word or 2 about that?
Yes, absolutely. So, in terms of, you know, telling my story to the offender, so that's considered like a confrontation. And for confrontation, you want to check in with yourself about what you are needing, or what is the motivation, because sometimes people need an apology. So then, if they go to that person and they don't apologize, they end up feeling worse. So then I would say this wasn't emotionally a good time to go for the confrontation. When I'm in a good place for it is, I want this person to know that I know what they did, that it was harmful, that it wasn't right. And even if they say I'm lying, or they say they don't remember, or they say it's not a big deal, or they say it's my fault, no matter what they say, I want to speak my truth, and I'm going to feel good about myself for speaking my truth. Then I would say to do that. But we also want to consider, like, timing. Is like Sunday dinner with everyone there in a restaurant the best place? I would think not. So you can think through with, loved ones, who you would want to be present. Is it safe for you to say it, physically safe for you to express it? Um, but so that's around the offender. In terms of telling family and friends, what I often encourage people to do is, you can test out the waters by either sharing a piece of your story and seeing how they respond, or bringing up the topic in general. So, one of the things that's happening on the news, you see all of these stories about either school shootings or child abuse or any of that, and listen for how your friends respond. Some people, post victim blaming statements. Some people post like, oh, all these girls lie. So as soon as you like, that's how their framework is, it would be a beautiful miracle if they made an exception and believed you, but it is likely not. So I want to kind of test the waters to see who is someone who is safe for me to share with and see how they handle a part of my story. And if they handle me well, then I can share the fullness of my story.
Folks, we're getting such good questions that I am so sorry, but we are at time. So to honor and respect Dr. Bryant's time and everyone who's here, thank you for attending today. Dr. Bryant, thank you for sharing of your wisdom and research. So grateful. Folks, a reminder, our next gathering will be about how to support caregivers, parents, guardians, and other caregivers on October 1st with Dr. Amy Adamczyk. Please do join us for that if you can. And we wish you blessings on your future work, on your ministry, on your research, on all that you all do. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you all. I'm seeing all your beautiful messages. Thank you.